Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Rachel and I am knitting. Not right now, but most of the time, and I have been knitting, so I'm going to tell you all about it. Today's video is the next installment of my FO Diaries series, or Finished Object Diaries series, which is a series where I walk you through a pattern that I've recently made, any obstacles I faced along the way, and ultimately whether or not I recommend the pattern for you. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and click the subscribe button so you don't miss future installments. You never know, I may go over something that you have been wanting to make. So with all that said, let's get started. Today I'm talking all about the Iza Cardigan, which is designed by Aleksandra of Vert and Rose. Now, before we really dive into it, let me just say, I'll give you a spoiler alert. I love the finished item that I have made from this pattern. It is quickly becoming one of the most wearable pieces in my wardrobe. I'm so pleased with it. I'm so happy that I made it. However, I do have some caveats with my ultimate satisfaction with this garment. There are some things that happened along the way that I would change if I were going back and doing it again. So I'll walk through all of that with you, but first let's go over the stats of the pattern itself. So as I mentioned, this is the Iza Cardigan. It's designed by Aleksandra of Vert and Rose. You can find her on Instagram and also purchase her patterns both on Ravelry and Etsy. So the Iza Cardigan, this is a bottom up knit flat cardigan. The sleeves are knit in the round. But you cast on at the bottom, you knit up until your armhole depth or your armpit depth, and then you separate this into 3 separate sections. So you knit one side of the front at armhole separation up to the shoulder point. You knit the other side of the front from armhole separation up to the shoulder point, and you also knit the back section from armhole separation up to the shoulder point, and then using a 3-needle bind off, you join each front section to the back panel. From there, you pick up stitches around the armhole opening to knit your sleeve, which you then knit in the round, and you also pick up stitches for the neckband. So that gives you an idea of how this pattern is constructed. As you can see, there are very beautiful lace panel details on both sides of the front of the cardigan. Oh, they're just gorgeous. They're just stunning. I think they're so beautiful, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me continue to the stats of the pattern. This was originally published in June of 2022, so it recently celebrated its 2nd birthday. Happy birthday to the Iza Cardigan. It calls for DK weight yarn, and for a US size 7 needle or a 4.5 millimeter needle for the body, and then a US size 5 or a 3.75 millimeter needle for the neckband. So the ribbing and the button band are all knit on US size 7. It's just the neckband that requires the US size 5. Now, also important to note, the button band is worked simultaneously to the body. There are some patterns out there where you pick up stitches for the button band. Not this one. You knit it at the same time as you're knitting the garment itself. The gauge called for in the pattern is 18 stitches and 30 rows equals 4 inches, and it's written in a pretty robust size range. It comes in 9 sizes ranging from extra small to 5 extra large, and has a finished bust circumference range, of 88 centimeters to 166 centimeters, which translates approximately to a finished bust circumference range of 34.5 inches to 65 inches. And it's designed to be worn with anywhere from 8 to 12 centimeters of positive ease or 3.15 to 4.75 inches of positive ease. So with the ease included there, the finished bust circumference is a size inclusive range. So that's great to see. There are some skills that will be required for finishing this pattern, just as with any pattern. So what you'll need to know, or what you'll need to be able to learn in order to make this pattern, is knitting flat, knitting in the round, picking up stitches, 3-needle bind off, tubular bind off, and setting up for tubular bind off, decreasing, and yarn overs. So that's an idea of what you may need to have in your toolbox before you approach this pattern, or have the preparation and the mindset to learn those on the go. And you can purchase this pattern for £7.50. So that's a pretty standard price for garment patterns, and no complaints there. So there's a general overview of the Iza cardigan. The construction, skills you need, the gauge, the yarn called for, etc. So now let's move into the stats of my finished Iza, so my personal stats with this garment that I made. But before I do that, let's just address everybody's favorite part of each of these episodes, and I'll show you what this looks like on my body. All right, that's enough of that. I don't know if that's everyone's real favorite part of the show, but I think it's hilarious, so it's my favorite part. But all that to say, let's talk about my Iza cardigan. I knit the size extra large, which is the 5th size in that 9 size range of 9 sizes that's offered in the pattern, and my finished bust circumference is 47 inches. Now in the pattern, the 5th size as written should have a finished bust circumference of 120 centimeters or 50 inches. Mine is 3 inches less than that. And my gauge, instead of being 18 stitches over 4 inches, I have 17 stitches over 4 inches. So you can see how just being 1 stitch off in your gauge measurement can really impact the final circumference of your garment. Okay, this is perhaps a good time for me to pause and just say that I'm a little confused here, because if my gauge is actually 17 stitches over 4 inches as opposed to 18 stitches over 4 inches, then the finished bust circumference of my garment should be in excess of 50 inches. It should be larger. So I'm not really quite sure what happened there, but I do know that my gauge was off and the final measurement was 47 inches for my garment bust circumference. This can really be, it can be heartbreaking, but in this case, I am really happy with the result. So please don't think that I'm saying you can be 1 stitch off without that impacting your fit. It absolutely will impact your fit, but in my case, it paid off and I'm happy with it. So the yarn I used is Treehouse Knits in the base Cashmere Elm DK. So this is a cashmere merino blend. It's really luxe. I'm very, very impressed with how soft this yarn feels, and also how warm this yarn feels. I am noticing though that there's a considerable amount of pilling on this yarn. I'm not sure. There's a few things to think about here. I'm not sure, number one, if that's because maybe the cashmere fibers in this blend have a shorter staple length and therefore are causing more pilling on this garment. Or another thing I just have to acknowledge, I've worn this multiple times. And by multiple times, I mean like probably in the high teens or 20s of times that I've worn this garment. I am constantly wearing this. I love it. It's so wearable. I'm so happy with how it turned out. So also the fact that I'm wearing it constantly can certainly be heavily contributing to the amount of pilling that's happening. But I do want to note that I'm really happy and impressed by this yarn in terms of feel and wear, like how it feels. It's warm, it's soft, as I mentioned, but it is quite pilly for me so far. So I want you to be aware of that if you're considering that. If pilling really bothers you, I would choose an alternative base. But this is in the colorway Don't Be a Pageant Mom, and this is from the Treehouse Knits Stars Hollow collection that was available for pre-order earlier this year in May of 2024. And this yarn was gifted to me. I did not purchase this yarn. It was sent to me in partnership with Treehouse Knits to promote the Stars Hollow collection in service of my role as an affiliate with Treehouse Knits. So just want to acknowledge that before we continue. So thank you, Lauren and the team at Treehouse Knits, for providing me with this yarn, because I knit it up into what is now one of my most favorite garments of all time. So I'm really, really grateful for this yarn that was sent. What are some other stats you may want to know about my process knitting this garment? It was on my needles for 3 months to the day. I cast this on May 3rd of 2024, and I cast it off on August 3rd of 2024. However, during that 3-month period, I was only actively knitting on this garment for 30 days, which I think is great. Great. All right, so those are my stats. That's all of the information going into what took the yarn and made it into a sweater. So now let me walk you through a bit of my timeline in making this so we can talk about some insights that I have about this pattern in general. So on May 3rd, as I said, I cast this on. I cast on the size extra large, the 5th size in the size range, and I chose that size based on an educated guess. Basically, what I'm doing now is I'm looking at garments that I've made and that I like the fit of, and I'm looking at the stitch count for those garments, particularly the stitch count under the sleeve. So either after sleeve separation if it's a raglan, or before armhole separation if it's bottom up. Basically what the widest point of the garment is, what that stitch count is for whatever weight I'm using. So for this item, I looked at my stitch count numbers on my field day cardigan. It's also written to be knit up in a size 7, but I actually knit my field day cardigan on a size 5. So the gauge was not going to translate directly, but I used my field day cardigan as a starting point to make an educated guess on what size I should cast on for a DK weight cardigan using a size 7. Now, I wasn't 100% sure that this would be the right size for me, that it would fit the way that I wanted a cardigan to fit, but based on my educated guess, I was comfortable moving forward with the size extra large. So, I knit a whole skein's worth of yarn as following the pattern instructions. Basically, I've had enough experiences recently where I have diligently gauge swatched, and then I've made a garment and the garment has not turned out the way that I was led to believe based on the metrics of my gauge swatching. So I figured this is an imperfect science, so I'm not going to give myself false hope by swatching extensively. I'm just going to get started and essentially trick my brain. I'll knit the pattern, I'll knit a good ways into the pattern, and then I'll use that as my swatch. So that's what I did. On May 7th, I had finished knitting up a whole skein's worth in the size extra large. I wet blocked it, and then I measured the data, and I determined that I was between 15 stitches over 4 inches and 17 stitches over 4 inches, which, as we've already discussed, how just one stitch can change your final circumference quite a bit. I'm 3 inches less on my finished garment than the size extra large in the pattern, just because I had one less stitch over 4 inches. But anyway, my gauge was measuring different metrics depending on where I measured on that one skein's worth of fabric that I knit up. So I determined that I basically would have anywhere from a 47-inch bust to a 55-inch bust circumference on the finished item based on the gauge I was measuring. And I figured that like the middle ground there would be fine. I may end up somewhere between 53 inches, but I felt comfortable with that. I felt fine with that because that would give me a little bit positive ease, but not so much positive ease that this no longer would feel like a fitted garment. So I continued. I didn't frog back the swatch that I had made, the whole skein's worth of fabric. I just kept knitting, and by May 27th I finished the body and I wet blocked it. Now before I wet blocked it, I was pretty convinced that this was just going to be frogged. I was fairly certain that it was not going to fit properly. I thought that it was just simply too small. Not only too small, but also too cropped. So I was just thinking, okay, that's really too bad, because throughout the month of May, I was so excited about this. I tried to work on other things, and I did work on a few other things here and there, but I kept coming back to the Iza cardigan. It kept calling to me. It kept wanting to be knit on, and I just couldn't refuse. So for spending a month devoted to the end result of this cardigan, to end in the month of May feeling like I've produced something that's just not going to fit my body in the way that I want it to, was pretty frustrating and disheartening. So I basically decided, after wet blocking it and confirming, like even after pinning it out and stretching it a little bit and trying to do a bit of an aggressive block, confirming that it was still, I was feeling at the time, too small and too cropped for what I wanted, I was thinking, man, this stinks. I'm going to have to frog this. But I didn't have the emotional maturity or the mental fortitude to frog it right then and there. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I kicked that bucket down the road, because I wouldn't have this most amazing piece now. But again, getting ahead of myself. So I said, okay, I'll frog this, but I'm not going to frog it now. So the body was folded up, put in my cedar chest and in the back of my mind, and I thought, like, that's a problem for my future self. She'll deal with it. She will be better, faster, stronger, smarter. Right now, I'm just a little toad on a log. I don't have the capabilities to deal with this. So days go by, weeks go by. By July 30th, I had a bee in my bonnet to finish projects. I don't know what was going on with me during that time, but I was just like, project, project, project. I need to get these off my needles, off my Ravelry project page, classify them as a finished object, not a whip anymore. I want to declutter my mind and get these projects wrapped up. So I finished a lot of projects. I put the sleeves on my clove sweater. Of course, now I can't think of what else I did, but I know I was very productive, and I felt just like I could breathe fire and I could do anything because I was getting all this stuff done. And then I thought, what if I got the Iza cardigan done? What if I revisited the Iza cardigan and just finished it? Because I was feeling like I was building momentum. I was like a snowball rolling down a mountainside and just picking up more and more and more snow and becoming more and more and more powerful. And so I was like, let me finish the Iza cardigan, because even if I have to frog it one day, I might as well wear it a couple times, like as a little like sweetheart cropped kind of tight negative ease cardigan, even though that wasn't my original vision for this. Might as well do that. Now, if you were to tell me, Rachel, why don't you just finish a sweater that's half done or that just needs sleeves and a neckband and wear it twice and then frog it, I would think, that is heinous. I'm not going to do all that work for something I'm just going to frog. But whatever. At the time, on July 30th, I was a different version of myself, and it made sense in my mind. So while watching The Bachelorette, I picked up the neckband stitches and I knit the neckband, and then I picked up the stitches for the first sleeve and I started the first sleeve. And then by August 3rd, I had finished the second sleeve and I was wet blocking it, and it was done. On August 5th, I added buttons, but really I'm counting the casting off and the weaving in the ends and the wet blocking. That's the finish date, so I'm counting August 3rd as my finish date. I should also say, while we're talking about it, these are the buttons. These are souvenir buttons from This Is Knit that I purchased in October of 2023. I say it every time I talk about these buttons, but they feel like Mentos. They're so sensory enriching. Oh, and I love them. Okay, but I should also say, These buttons were another reason I was heartbroken about this knit when I thought that it wasn't going to work out, because these match this yarn just so perfectly. They're meant to be on this cardigan. And I only had so many of these being souvenir buttons. I didn't want to use them on something that I would never wear. Like, I didn't want to finish this garment and then be unhappy with it and just have it languish in the bottom of my cedar chest, that's not a word, cedar chest, never to be seen again. But now, just look at me go. The buttons are seen daily because I wear this constantly. Okay, so a 3-month project with 30 days of active knitting. So now that we've gone over my process of knitting it, and you can kind of get a sense of the highs and lows that I experienced while knitting this pattern, I want to move now into the real nitty-gritty section of the FO Diaries series format, maybe the most controversial section, I don't know. But let's talk about the things that I wish were different. And if I'm being candid with you, which I always strive to be, there is a laundry list of things that I wish were different in this pattern, which brings me no pleasure to say. In fact, it actively displeases me to say, because how stressful is that to have to say that? It's extremely stressful to me. But I'm going to tell you nonetheless, because if you want to knit this pattern, I want you to be able to go knowingly and to go prepared. There are some issues that I had with this pattern, and there's different categories of issues as well. So I'll just talk about some general things that I wish were different with this pattern. The first of which, schematic. There's no schematic in this pattern, and excuse my French, but that sucks. There should be a schematic in this pattern, and I think in every garment pattern. It's incredibly crucial, particularly for plus sizes. It's so important. And part of the branding that this designer has with her portfolio of patterns is that these are being marketed as plus size friendly items, designs. Things made to fill a gap and with plus-sized makers in mind. Well, I just have to say, please add a schematic if that is true. Add a schematic. We need the schematic. Or maybe I'll just speak for myself. I need the schematic. And equally, I've talked about this before, I really think that designers should put the schematic front and center. I should be able to look at a schematic and just be snoopy about it before I purchase a pattern. I want to give you my money. I want to make your pattern, but I also desperately want and need to be an informed consumer. And I can't do that if the schematic is not visible to me before purchasing the pattern, and certainly even worse if there's no schematic even after purchasing the pattern. Like, please, there must be a schematic. I feel like this is a basic ask. I think that there has to be a schematic. Please have a schematic. Okay, so that's my first critique. The second critique, which is actually a great look in the mirror for myself, is that I think we should all be reminded that the world is vast, and there are people of all different backgrounds and, I don't know, things that they're used to. For instance, your units of measurement. My brain works in inches and in feet and in yards because that's what I was taught in school. So if you tell me something is 60 inches, I'll be able to have a mental picture of that simply because I understand inches, and then also based on my own bust measurement, if I'm 50 to 52 inches, I can reasonably conjure an image of what that 8 to 10 inch discrepancy is between my circumference and a 60-inch circumference, okay? But if you tell me that same figure but converted to centimeters, I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you talking about the finished bust circumference of the Iron Giant? Probably, that's what I'll be thinking. Or are you talking about, I don't know, the very hungry caterpillar? Maybe. I don't know, because I don't know centimeters. So I think that's another quick fix that should be addressed in this pattern, is that please have different units of measurement. Don't just have centimeters, also have inches. And like I mentioned, that's a great look in the mirror, because typically when I talk about needle sizes or when I talk about finished bust circumference on the channel, I think pretty consistently I've just used US needle sizes and I've talked about it in inches. So I'm going to try and do better to incorporate different units like centimeters and the millimeters for needles, because man, I just really didn't like the experience of reading this pattern and having to convert every single measurement to inches so I would know what I was knitting and what I was aiming for. So those are two things that I think should be addressed and would make the user experience of knitting this pattern so much more elevated, so much more user-friendly, particularly for users like me who are used to inches. So those are two general things about this pattern that I wish were different. There's also a few more specific things about this pattern that I wish were different. So looking at my notes here, I have a note that says there's an instruction on the right front wrong side that was confusing. So let me look at the pattern and see what I was referring to. Yeah, so basically this instruction said to work the first stitch when you're on the wrong side, which I felt was like, isn't the standard that if you're going to slip a stitch and not work it, that instruction is given explicitly? So to have what I thought was an intuitive piece of instruction be spelled out, it confused me. So it was this weird balance between spelling things out and then being vague about other things. I just felt like if there was a consistent level of explaining things throughout, that would have been more user-friendly as well. So yeah, just some things that just already were the standard that are being spelled out, but then other things that should have been explained more were just not. So that was not my favorite. There's other things that happened when knitting this pattern in that same vein where there just wasn't very much guidance, or I argue not enough guidance. Now, I've been knitting for almost 15 years. Later this year, it will have been 15 years that I've been knitting. This is not to say that I know everything. It's not to say that I'm an expert. There's like obviously so many things I don't know, so many things that I still have to learn in terms of knitting and, you know, fill in the blank, literally any other category in life. But I am an advanced knitter. I would argue that I am an expert knitter. I can look at a pattern and I can achieve what the pattern is asking me to do. However, this doesn't mean that I can't have opinions on the readability of a pattern or the user-friendly nature of a pattern. So while I was able to figure it out, I don't think every person reading this pattern and attempting to make this pattern could. So if you're a beginner knitter, maybe consider that before attempting this pattern. This is the only pattern from Aleksandra that I have made or even purchased and looked at, so I can't speak to her pattern portfolio. I'm just speaking to the Iza Cardigan. But just like small things, like for instance, when you're doing the lace on the wrong side, there's a purl two together during decreasing instead of some of the right side decreasing you would have been doing on the lace. And if you do the purl together as written in the pattern, the stitches will be reverse mounted. They'll be twisted on the right side of the fabric. So really that instruction should have been purl two together through the back loop. So I modified that to make that happen. Just little things like that. Also, the lace decrease math did not add up. So I had to make necessary changes along the way to make sure that my lace chart was not being negatively impacted by the decreasing around the neckband portion of the two front panels. So just things like that. If you're an experienced knitter or an advanced knitter, you can read your fabric and look at your fabric and say, yeah, this isn't right. The pattern is telling me something that is not really what should be happening, so you can make modifications as you go. I was able to do that, but it annoyed me. I don't think that someone knitting a pattern should have to do that. If they're paying for a pattern, the pattern should not have errors, is my opinion. So that was frustrating for me. And there was also an issue that I had with the neckband. Excuse me. So for instance, I dropped my phone. I didn't like fart or something. Okay, so for instance, with the neckband, based on the instructions for the buttonhole, if I had followed those instructions, my buttonhole for the neckband would have been here where this button is. So I did the buttonhole on the wrong side instead of the right side, so I could have the buttonhole in the correct placement on the right panel of the front of the cardigan. So just little things like that, little touches that I feel like the ball was dropped a little bit, or it's just like there's a disconnect between the person making it and the instructions in the pattern, and I think that the instructions in the pattern should be what fills that gap. And typically that's what happens, but in this case, I as the maker had to fill that gap, and I just don't think that that's great. I don't think that's how it should be. Now again, let me reiterate, because also again, it stresses me out to share constructive criticism or share reviews that aren't 100% rave reviews, just because it makes me feel mean, and I don't want to feel mean. It causes me too much stress. But at the same time, I highly value candor and honesty, and like I've said, I want to give you an honest review. So all those things are true. All of those frustrations I had are true about this pattern. But let me remind you, this is one of my most favorite things I've ever made. I wear it constantly. I'm so happy with it. So none of those frustrations that I had with the pattern are enough to stop me from loving what it made. I would do it again. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I would change some things. I feel more prepared and more equipped to do this pattern because I know the things that I needed to change already the first time, and I won't have those roadblocks of thinking like, what is going on? Am I nuts? Am I like, all of a sudden, do I not know how to read a pattern? What's happening here? If I do this again, which I probably will, honestly, it's a great pattern despite these things. I don't know. It still happened on the first time. Those things didn't not happen, you know? So yeah, there was some other thing that I was going to say also. What was it? I was talking about, it stresses me out to say 100% not perfect feedback. I don't remember. I don't remember. If it comes to me, I'll tell you. But yeah, I love this garment. I love how it turned out. But I would say that there's definitely some issues with the pattern in terms of the readability or the disconnect between intuition and hand holding. Like in some ways it airs on one side and in other ways it airs on the other, and I just wish that it had walked a line more in a middle ground between those two ends of that spectrum. Another thing about this pattern that I had issues with, which was not the pattern's fault, but I had issues with the button band. The thing about this button band is there are 4 different sets of instructions. So depending on if you're on the left front panel on the right side or the wrong side, each of these has its own instruction. Equally on the right front panel, depending if you're on the right side or the wrong side, there's a set of instructions for that. So between the left and the right, the front and the back, there's 4 different button band instructions. And for me, it was really hard to memorize them and know what I was doing at any given point. So I had to go back and look at the button band instructions many, many times, but the button band instructions were on page 2 and the lace chart was on page 9. So I was constantly scrolling up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down until I took a screenshot of the button band instructions and added the little screenshot image to page 9 of the pattern so I wouldn't have to keep going up and down, back and forth, which was so frustrating. Oh, this reminds me of the other thing I was going to say. The buttonhole placement. Now, in the same spirit of talking about letting intuition guide you and hand-holding and wishing there was a little bit more middle ground, I would have loved a little bit more hand-holding with buttonhole placement. The only thing that was said was to place them X number of centimeters apart, and I would have just liked a little bit more guidance. Maybe it would have been as simple as having the inch measurement there, because if it's, I don't know, what's however many centimeters. Like, let's say it said 3 inches apart or 2.5 inches apart. What are my words today? Anyway, if it said the inches, maybe I could have had a mental map a little bit better, but I don't know. I just didn't like having to figure that out. Now, also, I'll tell you, I've kind of made a rule for myself not to tell you about the comments I receive that I don't necessarily feel happy when I read them, because typically, if I acknowledge any sort of negativity that I receive on this channel, the response is even more overwhelming, even though it's a positive response. So many people comment and say, don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. And then it kind of moves into an area where the people who are trying to communicate that they have my back, they're communicating it in a mean way to the person who was not very nice in the beginning, which stresses me out more. Like, I don't want to create more meanness. But anyway, so I've already thought better of that. I'm not going to tell you about a comment I received, but I'm just trying to tell you, like, I'm not saying that this pattern needs to be like so foolproof that every single thing is explained to the point of absurdity. But I do think that this pattern would benefit from just a little bit more explanation added for the benefit of the people making this pattern. This is a great garment, but I don't know if I would have been equipped to make it if I were not an advanced knitter. Now, let me see if there's a difficulty classification in this pattern. I don't see it in the pattern itself. However, what if I look at the pattern page on Ravelry? Let's see here. So there is no classification that I can see of this pattern in terms of difficulty. There are 42 projects currently on Ravelry, and based on 6 votes, it has an overall rating of 4.3 stars. It has a clarity rating of 4.2 stars, and it has a medium average difficulty rating from 5 different ratings. All this to say, to my point, this is not a beginner-friendly pattern. I think that a beginner could make a cardigan like this, but I don't know if as a beginner, if I made this pattern, if I was looking at this pattern, I would have been successful, because there were too many moments where I had to adjust. I had to go off script, off of what the pattern said, in order to fill the gap where I feel the pattern left too much ambiguity. Okay? And again, just to ease my own anxiety, I'll tell you, I've been knitting for almost 15 years. Okay? So I know what I'm talking about. Sometimes. All right. Also, that stresses me out to say too, because I'm not trying to say if you haven't been knitting as long as I have, like, you don't know, and therefore I win the argument. Like, no. What I'm trying to say, I've said this before on the channel, it's the most concise way to communicate my anxiety, but my hope that you hear what I'm trying to say. So I'll say, please take this in the spirit it's given, which is that This is a great garment. I love this garment. I wish that the pattern was something I loved as much as I love what came from the pattern. Does that make sense? There's just some things that I wish were different. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, so ultimately, let's move on to what you've been waiting for. Do I recommend this pattern to you? Yeah, sure. Why not? It's a great, great garment. I think it's so great. I'm going to wear it probably constantly. I might want to be buried in it. I don't know. I actually don't think I want to be buried. I probably want to be cremated. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that I love this garment. I'm so happy with it. The fit is phenomenal, by the way. So if you're wondering if you should make a negative ease cardigan, you absolutely should. It looks so good. I haven't buttoned this. I will not button it. Seriously. Maybe I would button the top two just to switch things up, but I would not button all of the buttons because I will look like I'm trying to escape. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. But oh, it's just fabulous. I also thought if I'm going to make a negative ease cardigan, did I say this already? Maybe. I thought the lace panels won't shine if it's negative ease. I need to be able to button it all the way for the lace panels to have their moment. I thought it would look like this as a negative ease cardigan. Absurd! What was wrong with me? They look great and they're showed off, they're showcased, even though I'm not buttoning the cardigan. So happy with this. So happy with this. I do recommend that you find a pattern that will give you this look because it's so cute. Does it have to be the Iza Cardigan pattern? No, not necessarily. Certainly if you are a beginner knitter or you don't feel confident filling in the gap between your making process and what's written in the pattern, then maybe this is not the pattern for you. But if you feel equipped to do that, then certainly go for it. I definitely love what came from this pattern. And I am excited to make more vert and rose patterns. In fact, let me tell you, Aleksandra has this Anita sweater that was released recently. I think it's fabulous. It's so cute. And there's another, not cardigan, a pullover that she has. She hasn't released this design yet, but her sample is this most beautiful light purple color. Let's see if I can find it. I'm not going to click on this reel because I think it's just a cover. It's just a pretty cover for the reel, and if I click on it, it's not actually what the reel is about. But see this right here, this one? So pretty. I think that might be a good option for my Through the Wardrobe Yarn Co. yarn from Bridgerton, because I was making the Colette by Sari Nordland, but the size I'm making is going to be far too large for my preference. So I think that this to be released light purple sweater, I think that's what I may want to make. Wow, I cannot hold my hand still. Shake, shake, shake. Okay, great. So that's an overview and my experience knitting the Iza cardigan. I really want to drive this home. I love this garment. I love it so much. And the fact that I am not equally as pleased with how the pattern was written is not an indication of my overall pleasure with the garment, nor is it an indication of whether or not I will knit future patterns published or released by Aleksandra of Vert and Rose. So if you're thinking about knitting the Iza cardigan, I hope that this is helpful for you. I definitely recommend taking a screenshot of the button band instructions and putting that on the page of the pattern with the lace chart so you don't have to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I also recommend making a note of the rows that you put your buttonholes on. And also, if you don't do this, just a pro tip that I'll add to this video for free. When I make a buttonhole, so I made buttonholes on the right panel button band, I always put a locking stitch marker on the same row and the same stitch that the buttonhole is on the other panel. So that way, when it comes time to sew the buttons on, I know exactly where to sew them so that they're in line with the buttonhole placement. But yeah, there you go. Love this garment. Love it so, so much. I would love for you to have a garment that you love just as much. So if that's the Iza cardigan, cast it on immediately. You won't be sorry. Just remember, there may be some places where you're going to have to put your thinking cap on to fill the gap that may be caused by any confusion or ambiguity in the pattern. But ultimately, I do recommend this pattern if you feel like you've just got to have it. I'm so glad that I have it in my wardrobe, and I know that if you make it, you'll feel the same way. So stay strong, hold the course, and we may be able to match one day with some beautiful Iza cardigans. So that's all I have for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and hit that notification bell to be notified of my next upload. Last but not least, head over to Instagram and follow me at Rachel is Knitting if you don't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.